In 2023, a fifth of all state-level bills filed impacting the LGBTQ+ community came from Texas, according to a Human Rights Campaign analysis. Some policies passed, and several others progressed substantially, including one to remove the state's ban on homosexual conduct in the 2023 legislative session. On a special From the Vault edition of our Inside the Investigation program, we discuss updates to our team's OutLaw project, where the investigation could go next, and how the topic has played out in the years since our project's launch. Hello, welcome to another edition of Inside the Investigation, a From the Vault edition where our team takes a look back at some of its past investigative projects. I'm Director of Investigations and Innovation here at KXAN, Josh Hinkle. I'm joined today by my investigative colleague, Arezow Doost. Thank you for being with me.
Thanks for having me.
So Arezow and I were among about 30 staff members from KXAN who tackled this OutLaw project back in 2023, responding to the record number of bills that we were seeing filed at the state legislature that were specifically surrounding the LGBTQ+ community. Most of them were targeting that community, but one bill that really stood out to us was something that had come up many sessions for years and just never really had gone anywhere, but there was a concerted effort to get it passed finally. And what this was to repeal a measure that was still on the books after 50 years that was criminalizing what was termed in our statute as homosexual conduct. So essentially outlawing gay sex. And because of that, we just thought that was an interesting aspect to kind of talk about what we were seeing as a hot button issue in the legislative session that year. And specifically, we talked about a couple of bills that really advanced further than other ones that year, and you reported about a couple of them. I know that you have some updates for us.
You know, this was something that was very interesting to us because all session we kept hearing about impact to children, impact to families. And the three bills that we decided to really focus on had wide-reaching impact. You know, every Texan was going to be impacted in some way. One of the bills that we wanted to focus on was dubbed the drag ban legislation, essentially prohibiting and criminalizing sexually oriented performances in public spaces in front of minors. And, you know, there were several groups that have since 2023 tried to sue the state to stop enforcement. But one of the key components to this was the impact wasn't just to performers, but businesses who can now be fined up to $10,000 if in violation. Another bill that still draws protests to the Capitol today dealt with the book ban, the Reader Act. And really, this wanted book vendors to come up with a rating system and really review sexually explicit content to make sure that everything was okay for children. Now, supporters of the legislation kept saying all session long in 2023 that this was all about protecting children. But those on the other side opposed to this legislation said, no, this is about censorship and we can't have this across the state. Finally, one of the pieces of legislation that drew a lot of emotion and protests that we were there for included, healthcare for minors. It was dubbed the trans healthcare legislation. And this essentially banned medical gender transition when it came to children. Really, doctors who not only performed surgeries but helped with medication could have their licenses revoked and still could. And, we heard from families. I mean, every hearing that was in place that session, the rooms were packed with families impacted. Children who were going through the transition process and who wanted to be vocal and have lawmakers hear their stories. In fact, I'll never forget, there were several families who told lawmakers, if this legislation passes, I will have to move out of state because my child needs this care and we will not be able to provide that. But during that same time, we also heard from adults who had transitioned at a younger age and who felt that there were problems and there needed to be better safeguards in place. And, there's been impacts. Even as a couple months ago, the AG came out with an expanded version of this ruling saying that not only are doctors now going to be in violation, but also mental health counselors.
we were very mindful also when we were talking about this subject, that legislative session, that this was something that could get very political and that could, likely anger a lot of people when we talked about it, especially because many of the 30 staff members that we mentioned that took part in this project are members of the LGBTQ plus community, including myself. So we wanted to make sure that we told our audience and our readers and our listeners that this is why we have a unique perspective into this topic, because we're members of this community. We have access and understanding and sources that people outside the community may not. But because of that, we also wanted to be very mindful that people could doubt our reporting. And so we were transparent in the way that we were reporting things, the process, and also working on being fair and unbiased and letting people know exactly how things were reported throughout the legislative session and all the follow-ups we did after that. We even produced a companion podcast to this project and the dozens of stories that we produced for it that interviewed several of our staff members that were taking part in this project, because we wanted to make sure that they had an opportunity to kind of share their story, but also how that has impacted the way that they report and the challenges that they've faced, and implemented that into some of the thinking that we did as we were tackling this project. In addition to that, we really kind of kept going through the next legislative session into 2025, because we knew that while many of those bills did not pass, we were going to see several of them probably popping up in the next legislative session, which we did, including the resurgence of that bill to repeal the homosexual conduct ban. And so what we saw that legislative session was that bill progressed further than it had ever in the 50 plus years prior to that. There had been dozens of attempts to try to take it off of our books, but I really think because of all of the attention that this entire topic surrounding LGBTQ plus people has created, it kind of led to some momentum for this bill. It ended up passing a House committee. It passed the actual full House as well, and it went over to the Senate where it eventually stalled. But it had never made it that far. So that kind of shows you the trajectory. And I know that Representative Benton Jones, who filed the bill, intends to file it again next legislative session in January, because it's important to him as a gay man, but also he realizes that there's a strong likelihood that it could make it even further because it made it so far in the last legislative session. But you've also been tracking several other bills that you mentioned, and a lot of them have kind of played out in the court process since then, but tell us about those.
Well, ever since the bills went into effect, the lawsuits started happening right away, and we've been tracking it for years now. For instance, a lot of the legislation is still tied up in court. For instance, the drag ban, the law is in effect, but there is a broader lawsuit that's still playing out, and we're of course trying to see what's going to happen with that. The book ban was heavily challenged because of concerns of First Amendment violations. That's in the appeals process right now. The trans, healthcare bill, that legal challenges finally concluded in that, and the courts found, the Texas Supreme Court, in fact, upheld that ban. So we're, of course, going to continue to monitor this because it's still impacting people and the lawsuits are still in effect.
All right. Well, Arezow, I know that we will continue monitoring what's happening in the courts, and as the build up to the legislative session that starts in January, we have to get through the election first in November, but we will see how this all plays out next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can watch all new episodes of Inside the Investigation on the KXAN Plus Smart TV app every Friday. You can also listen to an audio version on KXAN's Investigative podcast with new episodes every Saturday morning wherever you get podcasts.